Germany. After World War II, Germany was divided, but in 1947 the French zone, the American zone, and the British zone were united to form West Germany. So Germany was divided into two parts, East and West Germany. West Germany only had 50% of the land it had before the war, but they began to prosper. Their output exceeded the output that they even had before the war. Again, with a lot of the factories bombed out, they were forced to buy better machinery. I mean, I can tell you something, having spent 27 years in a factory, sometimes the machinery gets old and obsolete, and the management is aware that there are new machines out there that can do more and do better, but then again, if your own machines are still working, why spend millions of dollars for new machinery? But in the case of the Germans, they had to buy the newer stuff because their old had been bombed away. So they had a big output. Unemployment went way down to a mere 0.4%. That means 99.6 out of 100 people were working. Really high employment. Then, in 1990, East Germany joined them. And the Germans were really happy, hey, we're united again, we're a big country once again, and in no time flat, the enthusiasm faded. Here's what happened. I'm giving an example. I mean, suppose the United States were to unite with Mexico and say, hey, you know, we're tired of being enemies, let's unite into one big super country and call it the United States of North America. I mean, let's suppose. Then we'd say, okay, now you pesos are only worth about 6 cents to our dollar, but we'll trade you a peso for every dollar. I mean, we'll trade you even, 1 peso for a dollar. What this would do would bring our own economy way down. Well, what happened? The East Germans are still using marks. The West Germans using marks, but the East German mark was only worth about 1 penny to every basically a penny to a dollar, 1% of what the West German marks were. But the Germans said, we'll trade you. We'll take in your old marks that are practically worthless, and we'll give you our West German marks. Well, this meant that all the German mark just went down, way, way down. Then it was found that a lot of East Germans had been spying on their West German relatives, either under communism, or they were spying on each other. I mean, a whole lot of papers were uncovered, and they found out, hey, my brother was spying on me and reporting on me, and my cousin over here was also spying on me, and a lot of them were put on trial for crimes. But a lot of these German people said, hey, let's forget about this. This was all in the past. Let's just simply act like it never happened and move on. But the German economy did not fully recover what it had been before the unification. Essentially what they did was take on a bunch of lazy, non-industrious East Germans who had grown up under communism, and they were not productive, they were not hardworking, not typical normal German, and they dragged the feet down of all of Germany. Eventually, Germany started off with a conservative government, and eventually it was replaced by a socialistic government. And a socialistic government did even worse than the democratic government had, or the capitalistic government had. All right. Great Britain. First thing that the British did, they didn't even wait till the war was over. Before the war was over, they ousted Winston Churchill and brought in Clement Attlee. And he was determined to make a socialistic welfare state out of Great Britain. Medicine was free, everybody had free government-provided health care. Cradle-to-grave welfare, you were taken care of from the time you were born to the time you were died. But the people of Britain said, the reason socialism never worked before was because it was run by men like Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini. Get some good men in office and they'll make it work. So Great Britain elected 3 of the most morally upright men who'd ever governed a country, and one of them was Attlee. I mean, I'll say this for the man. He was probably morally upright. And they all said, hey, we won't shirk like other countries do. We're going to all pitch in. We're going to make this work. We're going to have equality for all. And they all tried hard to pitch in and make it work, and even put forth extra effort. And it didn't work. For at first it appeared to be working, but in the long term it declined. In the meantime, abroad, Great Britain was losing its colonies. In 1960, they gave Jamaica their independence. They gave up on governing Egypt and the Middle East. They turned the Middle East over to the United Nations. They largely got out of all of Africa, turned over South Africa to run itself. Canada and Australia remained part of Britain. They didn't care to leave. So to this day, Canada and Australia still have ties to Britain. If you ever pick up a Canadian nickel, guess whose picture you'll see on it? Anybody know? Canadian money, whose picture is on it? Queen Elizabeth II. Yeah, some of you have seen it. Yeah, I went to Great Britain once. She's been queen so long, you just don't find any coins anymore that have anyone else's picture on them. But I saw when I was in Britain one coin that had the head of her father, George VI, on it. Again, she's been queen a long time. Anyway, as Britain went into deeper and deeper into socialism, they declined. But one woman I want you to remember, Great Britain, Margaret Thatcher. She was to be prime minister longer than anyone else in the 20th century. Now in the 19th century, there were some longer. And she ruled Great Britain for 11 years. She tried to turn Great Britain away from socialism. She fought hard against labor unions. Your book says it's the prosperity that Britain experienced under her was somewhat, it was sporadic. In other words, it was local. Certain places prospered and others didn't. A big problem that she had, now this is something that we have a politician here in our country who's trying to do, is get what's called a flat tax. You know, where everybody pays the same tax rate regardless of income. Now, this may mean little to you, but when you get out in the world and earn your own money and start paying taxes, a lot of ordinary people feel like the rich should carry a bigger share of the tax burden. So basically what I'm saying is the more money you make, the higher percentage of taxes you pay. Well, Margaret Thatcher said, let's have a flat tax where everybody, regardless of wealth, pays the same amount of taxes. It was tried in Britain, and it brought her government down. The poor people cried, this is nothing but a poll tax. This is nothing more than to keep the rich from paying their fair share. The rich should pay more because they have more. Maybe you feel the same way. I know this, my dad did. But eventually this was one of the things that upseated Margaret Thatcher. And she was ousted. Regrettably, by the time she was ousted, she was fairly well up in years. And her mind started going bad. They had a movie out about it about 2 or 3 years ago called Iron Lady. Did any of you happen to see it? One of you, okay, Iron Lady. At least 2 of you, okay, 2 of you saw it, yeah. Pretty accurate. I mean, the Thatchers saw it, the Thatcher family, they said they didn't like it. Showed the older woman with her husband. She was still believing that her husband was alive, even though had been dead for a few years, but in her mind, he was still there, and she would talk to him on a regular basis. I mean, this happens to a lot of older people, regretfully. But reminiscent of bygone days when she had been in power, when she had been fairly strong in Britain. Now, another thing, during her term of office, Argentina seized the Falkland Islands from Britain. The Falkland Islands were way down there. You know that Britain's on the northern hemisphere, Argentina's in the southern hemisphere. Margaret Thatcher said, we're not going to give them up. She talked to the admirals, and the admiral said, well, we can take them back. So she sent her navy down to the Falklands, lost about 30 of her own sailors, but they took the Falkland Islands back from Argentina. Again, in a show of force that we're not going to let the little nations of the world bully us around. They called her Iron Lady, and some people said she was like the only man in all of Parliament as manhood began to get weaker and weaker and show less aggressiveness and less assertiveness. Anyway, when Thatcher left, John Major took over for a while. Don't worry about his name. Eventually, Tony Blair became the Prime Minister. And he was to rule as a conservative. Your book says following Bill Clinton, with whom he was friends with. Blair was unable to solve the problem of unemployment, and eventually David Cameron became the Prime Minister. And again, it's interesting to see what's going to happen. Here's what we have. Great Britain, their experiment with socialism has not worked. The people have refused to change from socialistic ways. And what's the result? The result, they've lost all their colonies, lost a lot of their wealth, and are now looked on as a second-rate power. Great Britain once boasted we have the most powerful navy in the world. They can no longer brag about that, and also, even if they did, they need a navy. They don't have a space program as such. They joined with Europe's space program, but they don't have the resources to become a superpower that they once were. Britain and France, two of our world's allies, two of the best allies suppose we have in the world, and they're not very strong. And France is somewhat undependable. Socialism has not worked for them. All right, next time we'll take up with Eastern Europe after communism, Yugoslavia, Russia, and talk about the possibility of a united Europe, and then we'll go on to talking about the United States.